She never meant to change anyone's life. All Lila wanted that morning was a quiet cup of coffee before work. But when she saw the stranger ahead of her couldn't pay, she did something small, something kind. What she didn't know was that the man she helped was a billionaire in disguise. That single act of generosity would unravel secrets buried for decades, lead her to a family she never knew, and force her to choose between love, truth, and legacy. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated for more thrilling stories. The rain hadn't stopped for days. The sky hung low and gray over the small cafe where Lila worked, her hands chapped from washing dishes, her heart heavy from bills she couldn't pay. Her uniform was faded, her shoes worn thin, but her smile never faltered. Every morning, she whispered a quiet prayer before tying her apron. Lord, help me be kind today, even when life isn't kind to me. That morning, just before closing, a tall man in an immaculate gray suit hurried in, drenched, breathless, and impatient. His name was Daniel Cross, though Lila didn't know that. To her, he was just another tired customer. He ordered a simple black coffee. When he reached into his pocket to pay, his expression froze. His wallet was gone. Of course, he muttered under his breath, frustration and embarrassment clashing in his tone. I must have left it in the car. Without hesitation, Lila slid a few crumpled bills from her apron pocket and smiled. It's all right, sir. This one's on me. He looked at her, puzzled. You don't even know me. She shrugged softly. Doesn't matter. Everyone deserves kindness once in a while. He nodded, took the coffee, and left, no name, no thanks beyond a quiet, "You're too kind." 2 weeks later. The cafe door opened again. Lila looked up from the counter, and froze. The man in the suit stood there, flanked by 2 assistants. This time, his clothes were dry, his demeanor calm, almost humbled. Miss, he said gently, stepping closer. Do you remember me? Lila blinked, unsure. You're the coffee man. He smiled faintly. Yes. The coffee man. He paused, then placed an envelope on the counter. You paid for my drink when I had nothing. I've been thinking about that moment ever since. Inside the envelope was a check for $100,000, more money than Lila could dream of. Her hands trembled. I can't take this, she whispered. It isn't charity, Daniel said softly. It's gratitude. You see, that day, I wasn't just missing my wallet. I was running from a meeting that could have ruined me. You reminded me that there's still goodness in the world, something my wealth could never buy. Tears welled in her eyes. I was just doing what felt right. And that, he replied, is what the world needs more of. He left quietly, leaving her stunned, clutching the envelope to her chest. Months passed. With that money, Lila fixed her mother's roof, paid off debts, and reopened the cafe under a new name, The Kind Cup. Business blossomed. People came not just for coffee, but for warmth, for hope. Then one morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, a sleek black car stopped outside. A familiar figure stepped out, Daniel Cross, the billionaire she'd once bought coffee for. But something was different. His eyes were heavy, his face pale. He looked broken. He approached her slowly. Lila, he said, voice trembling, I need your help again. She frowned gently. With what? Daniel hesitated, glancing at the floor. It's my daughter. She's missing, and I think. He stopped mid-sentence, his phone buzzing urgently. The color drained from his face. He looked at the screen, then at her, and whispered. They found her. But she asked for you. Lila's heart stopped. Lila stood frozen behind the cafe counter, her apron still dusted with flour, the sound of rain whispering against the glass. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. They found her. But she asked for you. She didn't even know his daughter's name. Moments later, Daniel's car sped through the city streets, Lila sitting beside him, her heart pounding. Neither spoke much, just the hum of the tires on wet asphalt and the storm building outside. Finally, they arrived at St. Miriam's Children's Hospital. Daniel was visibly shaking. His usual calm, commanding presence was gone. She's only 12, he whispered. Emma. She's been missing for 2 weeks. The police found her wandering near an old train station, weak, scared, barely talking. They reached the room. A nurse smiled softly. She's awake, Mr. Cross. But she keeps asking for Miss Lila. Lila stepped in. On the hospital bed lay a small girl with pale cheeks and wide, tearful eyes. The moment their gazes met, the child whispered, "You're the lady from the cafe." Lila's breath caught. The cafe? Emma nodded weakly. You gave me a muffin one night, when I was hungry. You said, kindness always finds its way home. Lila covered her mouth in shock. She remembered, a little girl, late at night, shivering by the door. She'd given her a muffin and a blanket and prayed someone would find her. Daniel sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. All this time, she found you before she found me. Lila gently brushed the girl's hair aside. You're safe now, sweetheart. Emma smiled faintly. I told Daddy you'd come. For the first time, Daniel's eyes filled with tears. You saved both of us, he whispered. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Lila became unlikely friends. He started visiting the Kind Cup daily, sitting quietly by the window, watching her greet every customer with the same warmth that had changed his life. He offered to expand her cafe into a foundation, the Kind Cup Initiative, to feed hungry children. But Lila hesitated. I don't want to lose what makes it special, she said. It's not about money, it's about heart. Daniel nodded. Maybe that's why I need you more than you need me. One evening, as they locked up the cafe, Daniel's driver approached with a letter in hand. Sir, he said quietly, this came by courier. Urgent. No return address. Daniel tore it open. His face went pale. Lila stepped closer. What is it? He handed her the letter. The paper trembled in his hand. It read, You don't know the truth about your coffee girl. Ask her what happened 10 years ago at the orphanage. Lila froze. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Daniel turned to her slowly, eyes filled with confusion and fear. Lila, what is this? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Tears filled her eyes. Daniel, she whispered, voice breaking, there's something I never told you. The cafe lights flickered, and went out. At the end, the cafe was swallowed by darkness. Only the rain tapping against the windows filled the silence. Daniel found the flashlight on his phone and turned it on. The light caught Lila's face, pale, trembling, her eyes glistening with something deeper than fear. Lila, he said quietly, what happened at the orphanage?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she sank into one of the chairs and took a shaky breath. 10 years ago, she began, I wasn't a maid. I was one of the children at St. Agnes Orphanage. We didn't have much, but we had each other. One winter night, the building caught fire. We lost everything, including a little girl. Daniel frowned. A little girl? Lila nodded. Her name was Emma. Daniel froze. My daughter? She shook her head. No. Another Emma. I thought she died that night, but later, I learned a wealthy family had taken a child from the orphanage that same week. A girl with the same birthmark, the same locket. Daniel's breath quickened. The locket with the tiny dove? Lila's voice cracked. Yes. I gave it to her. She was my baby sister. Silence. Daniel's hand gripped the table to steady himself. Are you saying? Lila nodded through her tears. Your daughter, Emma Cross, is my sister. The storm outside roared, lightning flashing across the cafe. Daniel backed away, disbelief etched across his face. That's impossible. We adopted Emma when she was barely a year old. The agency said she had no family. She did, Lila whispered. She had me. Daniel's phone buzzed suddenly. The caller ID read private number. He hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice came through the line. If you want the truth about the girl, come to St. Agnes, midnight. Bring the maid. The call ended. Daniel and Lila stared at each other. Lila's heart pounded. Who was that? Daniel slipped his phone into his pocket, eyes narrowing. I don't know, he said softly. But whoever it is, they know more than both of us. Thunder cracked outside. Lila looked toward the dark window, her reflection trembling in the glass. Then I guess, she whispered, we're going back to where it all began. The lights flickered back on, just long enough for them to see a photo slipped under the cafe door. It was a picture of little Lila and baby Emma, together at the orphanage. On the back, written in black ink, were the words. The fire was no accident. The wind howled as midnight crept over the ruins of St. Agnes Orphanage. The old gates moaned when Daniel pushed them open, his flashlight slicing through the fog. Lila followed close behind, clutching her coat to her chest. The once bright building was now only brick bones and ivy. The sign that had once read, St. Agnes Home for Children, dangled by a single rusted chain. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked. Lila nodded. If there are answers here, I have to hear them. They stepped inside. Dust and ash blanketed the floor. A charred staircase led upward like a broken spine. Daniel's light swept over the wall, rows of faded photographs of children. Some frames were empty, burned away. And then they saw it, a photograph half buried in debris. Two little girls, Lila and baby Emma, sitting beside a smiling woman in a nun's habit. Mother Ruth, Lila whispered. She ran the orphanage. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hall. Daniel grabbed Lila's arm. We're not alone. Out of the shadows stepped a frail figure in a gray cloak. Her voice, raspy but warm, broke the silence. I wondered when you'd come back. Lila gasped. Mother Ruth? But they said you died in the fire? The old woman's eyes glistened. No, child. I lived. But the truth was buried with the ashes. Daniel took a step forward. Then tell us, who started it? Mother Ruth's gaze drifted toward the window, where lightning illuminated her trembling hands. The night of the fire, men came with boxes. They said they were taking the children to new homes, but they were taking records too. Someone wanted every trace of this orphanage erased. Why? Lila asked, voice shaking. The nun's answer came barely above a whisper. Because one of those children wasn't supposed to exist. Thunder cracked again. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Mother Ruth turned slowly toward Lila. Her eyes softened. Lila, my dear, you were never registered under that name. Your birth papers were hidden before you were even brought here. Lila's breath hitched. Hidden by who? Before the nun could answer, a crash erupted from the hallway. The main doors slammed shut. Smoke began to creep in through the cracks of the old wood. Daniel shouted, "Is something burning?" Mother Ruth's face went pale. "No," she whispered, horror in her voice. "Someone set it on fire again." Flames flickered along the doorway, cutting off their exit. And just as Daniel tried to force it open, a shadow appeared on the other side of the glass, a tall man in a dark coat, watching them through the smoke. In his hand glowed the light of a lighter. Then, as fire climbed the walls, the man pressed his palm against the window and mouthed a single word. Stop. The crackle of burning wood swallowed every sound. Smoke curled through the hallways like dark ribbons. Daniel threw his shoulder against the door, but the old frame wouldn't budge. Lila, he coughed, we have to find another way out. Mother Ruth pointed toward the kitchen. There's a cellar hatch behind the old pantry, go. They stumbled through the haze. Flames leapt across the ceiling, painting the walls in orange light. Lila's eyes watered, her lungs burning, but she didn't stop until they reached the far room. The cellar door was half buried in rubble. Daniel yanked at the handle, it moved only an inch. Then a thud sounded behind them. The tall man in the dark coat stood in the doorway, smoke swirling around him. His face was hidden by the glow of the fire, but his voice carried through the chaos. You're not supposed to be here, Lila. Daniel stepped in front of her. Who are you? The man lowered his arm, showing a burned scar across his wrist, the same pattern Lila remembered from her childhood. A lightning-shaped scar. Her voice trembled. I've seen that before. One of the men who carried the boxes the night of the fire had that scar. The man's eyes softened. I was one of them, he said quietly. But I wasn't trying to hurt you, I was trying to save you. Mother Ruth gasped. Michael? He nodded. Yes, sister. I warned you to get them out. Daniel looked between them. If you tried to save her, why set this place ablaze again? Michael shook his head. I didn't. Someone followed me here, they're finishing what was started. Outside, a distant engine roared and a beam of light swept through the broken windows, headlights. Michael hurried toward the cellar. Hatch and kicked away the debris. Go. There's a tunnel that leads to the chapel ruins. You'll be safe there. Lila hesitated. You're coming with us. He shook his head. Not yet. I have to retrieve the records, they prove who you are. Before Daniel could protest, an explosion ripped through the far wall, throwing them all to the ground. The world blurred in fire and dust. When Lila blinked the smoke from her eyes, Michael was gone. The hatch was open. She and Daniel pulled Mother Ruth into the tunnel just as the orphanage groaned and collapsed behind them. Minutes later they stumbled out into the night air behind the chapel ruins, coughing, shaken but alive. The old bell tower loomed above them, cracked and silent. Daniel turned to Lila. "He called you by your real name. What did he mean?" Lila pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the small dove-shaped locket beneath her collar. "I don't know, but he said those records prove who I am." From the distance came the wail of sirens, and then, over the wind, the faint ring of metal striking stone. Lila looked toward the tower. The bell, motionless for a decade, was swinging, tolling once, twice. On the third toll, something fell from its rafters and hit the ground with a dull thud. Daniel picked it up, a sealed envelope, edges scorched, marked with 2 words in fading ink. "For Lila Cross." Lila's heart stopped. "Cross?" she whispered. "That's your name, Daniel." The bell tolled again. The bell's final echo faded into the mist. Daniel and Lila stared at the envelope between them, its paper singed, the name Lila Cross written in careful script. Lila's voice shook. "Why does it have your surname?" Daniel exhaled, the rain running down his face. "Only one way to find out." He tore the edge open. Inside lay a single folded page, yellowed with age and smelling faintly of smoke. Daniel handed it to her. "It's addressed to you." Lila's fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, almost formal. "To the child they will call Lila, if you are reading this, it means the night I feared has come. You were born into a family of power, but also of danger. To protect you, I placed you in the orphanage under another name. The Cross family can never know what was taken from them, or why. When you are ready, seek the silver key hidden in the chapel bell. It will lead you to the truth, and to your father. Forgive me. I did this to save your life. Amar." Lila read the initials aloud. M.R. "Mother Ruth?" The old nun's face went pale. "No, child. Those aren't my initials." Daniel frowned. "Then whose?" Before she could answer, the roar of sirens grew louder. Flashlights cut through the trees. Police cars pulled up near the ruins. An officer shouted, "Is anyone hurt?" Daniel waved them down. "We're fine. The fire's out back there." As the officers rushed past, one of them stopped and spoke quietly to another. Lila caught only fragments, records recovered, unidentified male, hospital. Her heart skipped. "Michael, he's alive." Daniel touched her shoulder. "We'll go to him. Maybe he can explain this letter." Mother Ruth nodded weakly. If those records survived, the truth might finally be free. An hour later, in the flickering light of St. Miriam's Hospital, they found a nurse waiting outside a curtained room. "Mr. Cross? Your friend is unconscious but stable. He kept asking for someone named Lila before he passed out." Lila stepped inside. Michael lay pale and bandaged, the burned scar on his wrist glowing faintly under the monitor's light. Beside him, on the bedside table, lay a small silver key. She picked it up and turned it over in her palm. The head of the key was engraved with the shape of a dove, the same as her locket. Her breath caught. "It's the key from the letter." Daniel leaned closer. "Then it's true. You're—" Before he could finish, Michael's eyes fluttered open. He reached for her hand, whispering hoarsely, "The key doesn't open a door. It opens a vault, under your father's old estate. Lila froze. My father's estate? Michael's gaze met hers. The Cross estate. Daniel stepped back, stunned. That's my family's land. The heart monitor beeped faster. Michael clutched Lila's wrist. He's alive, Lila. Your father's alive. But he's not who you think. The monitor flatlined. Nurses rushed in. Outside, thunder rolled again as Daniel and Lila stood in the hallway, the silver key gleaming in her trembling hand. She turned to him, eyes wide with fear and hope. Daniel, what if my father isn't dead? Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating a shadowed figure watching them from across the street, a man holding an identical dove-shaped locket. Dawn broke pale and silver over the hills outside the city. Lila stood by the car window, the small silver key turning slowly between her fingers. Every time she caught the glint of the little dove engraved at its head, her heart clenched tighter. Daniel drove in silence. The long road curved toward the distant outline of Cross Manor, a stone estate that seemed to rise straight out of the fog. This is where I grew up, Daniel said quietly. But the east wing has been closed for years. After my father's accident, no one was allowed in. Lila looked at him. Your father, or mine? He didn't answer. When they reached the gates, ivy hung like curtains from the iron bars. Daniel typed an old code into the rusted keypad. The locks groaned and clicked. The car rolled forward into a courtyard filled with fallen leaves. Inside, the mansion smelled of dust and memory. Portraits lined the walls, cross ancestors in dark suits, somber faces watching from the past. One painting made Lila stop. A young woman with bright eyes, wearing a dove-shaped locket. Daniel, she whispered, that's my locket. He studied the nameplate. Margaret Rose Cross, 1958. Lila's breath caught. M.R., the initials on the letter. They followed the corridor toward the east wing. Cobwebs brushed their sleeves. At the end of the hall stood an iron door, half hidden behind an old aff, Margaret holding a newborn baby, and a smaller slip of paper with 5 words. The truth lies under the chapel. Daniel frowned. We just came from the chapel ruins. Edward shook his head. You saw the outer chapel. There's another, the family chapel, beneath the gardens. It hasn't been opened in decades. Lila closed her eyes. Then that's where we'll go. Edward rose, gripping his cane. Be careful. If the past is buried there, it was buried for a reason. As they climbed the stairs back toward the main hall, the wind pushed against the old windows, whispering through the corridors. At the door, Daniel turned the key in the lock, and froze. On the marble floor lay a single white dove feather and a note written in neat black ink. You're not the only one looking for the chapel. They both looked toward the gates. Through the fog, a car engine idled, headlights burning through the mist, pointed straight at them. Inside the car, a silhouette waited, watching. The engine outside rumbled once, then faded into silence. By the time Daniel threw open the manor doors, the car was gone, just 2 trails of tire marks vanishing down the misty drive. Whoever they were, he muttered, they knew we'd come. Lila stood in the doorway, clutching the note with shaking hands. The single white feather slipped from her fingers and drifted onto the marble. Let's find the chapel, she whispered. The next morning dawned gray. In the garden behind the manor, vines twisted around broken statues, and roses bloomed wild among the stones. Edward led them through a crumbling archway toward an overgrown hedge maze. At the center, he said, there's an old fountain. That's where the entrance used to be. The maze was thick with thorns. Branches snagged Lila's sleeves as they wound through the narrow paths. Finally, they stepped into a small clearing where the fountain stood, its basin cracked and dry. Daniel brushed away leaves, revealing a circle of marble carved with the Cross family crest, the same dove that marked Lila's locket and the silver key. She knelt, fitted the key into a hidden lock beneath the crest, and turned. A deep metallic click echoed through the garden. The fountain groaned and slid aside, revealing a spiral staircase leading down into the earth. They descended slowly. The air grew cooler, scented with dust and roses. At the bottom lay a small chapel lit by shafts of sunlight filtering through stained glass windows buried under the soil. Paintings of angels lined the walls. At the altar rested a wooden chest covered in cobwebs. Lila ran her hand across the lid. This must be what she wanted us to find. Edward nodded. Open it. Inside were bundles of letters, photographs, and a leather-bound journal. The first page bore Margaret's handwriting. If you are reading this, my love for you has outlived my breath. The secret our family kept is not about wealth, it is about blood. There is another child. A brother. Daniel's head jerked up. A brother? Lila looked between them, her pulse racing. Then someone else survived the fire. Before Edward could speak, a sudden crash echoed from the staircase above, metal against stone. Daniel grabbed Lila's arm. Someone's closing the entrance. Dust rained from the ceiling. A heavy thud shook the chamber as the fountain above slid back into place. They were sealed inside. Then, from the shadows near the altar, a voice spoke, steady, calm, and eerily familiar. I was wondering when you'd finally open her chest. They turned. A man stepped into the light, his coat covered in ash, a scar running across his wrist, the same lightning-shaped scar Lila remembered. Michael, she whispered. You survived the fire again? He smiled faintly. I told you, Lila. The fire wasn't meant to kill you. Daniel took a cautious step forward. Then why lock us in? Michael's eyes darkened. Because there's something you both need to see before the others arrive. He pointed toward the far wall. Carved into the stone was a faded inscription, and below it, the outline of a sealed door. Lila traced the inscription with her fingertips. The words, half erased by time, read, Here rests the child who never left. Her breath caught. Another child. Michael nodded. Your brother. A low grinding began behind the wall, as if something inside were stirring after years of silence. The candles flickered. And from beyond the stone, a single knock echoed, slow, deliberate, alive. The echo of the knock faded through the chapel like a heartbeat. Lila's pulse raced. Did you hear that? Daniel gripped a candle, eyes fixed on the sealed stone door. There's someone in there. Edward steadied himself against the altar. Impossible, this place has been sealed for decades. Michael stepped forward, pressing his palm to the inscription. Not impossible. Hidden. She must have known someone would come looking. He turned to Lila. The key, please. She handed him the small silver key that had started everything. Michael slid it into a narrow slot near the base of the door. There was a low click, then a deep rumble. Dust showered from the ceiling as the slab of stone slowly swung outward. Behind it was a small crypt lit by a single shaft of light from above. In the center stood a glass coffin. Lila took a step closer. Inside lay a young man, no older than Daniel, with dark hair, peaceful as if asleep. A silver chain rested across his chest, holding a dove pendant identical to Lila's. Her voice trembled. "That's him, my brother." Edward's cane clattered to the floor. "Good Lord. I thought he was gone." Michael whispered, "Margaret couldn't let him be taken. She put him in stasis, cryogenic sleep, using the old medical wing beneath the manor. She told me he'd be safe until she could come back." Daniel stared in disbelief. "Cryogenic sleep? You're saying he's been alive all these years?" Michael nodded. "Barely. The system was designed to keep him alive for 10 years at most. It's been 15. Lila pressed her hand against the glass. "He's still warm." A soft hum filled the chamber. The pendant on the young man's chest began to glow faintly. Then the hum shifted into a steady rhythm, like breathing. Daniel stepped back. "What's happening?" Michael's eyes widened. "He's waking up." The glow spread through the coffin, light pulsing like a heartbeat. A hiss of air escaped as the glass slowly lifted. The young man's chest rose, then fell. His eyes fluttered open, pale blue, the same as Lila's. He looked at her and whispered one word, rough from years of silence. "Lila?" Tears filled her eyes. Yes, I'm here." Daniel helped her steady him as he sat up weakly. "You're safe now," she said. "We're family." He shook his head slowly. "No, none of us are safe." Edward frowned. "Why?" The young man turned toward the stairway, fear flashing across his face. "Because they followed me here." A distant clatter echoed above, the sound of boots striking stone. Voices shouted orders. Michael swore under his breath. "They've found the entrance." Lila looked from the glowing coffin to her brother's trembling hands. "Who are they?" The young man met her gaze, his voice barely a whisper. "The same people who burned the orphanage, and they're not done yet." The sound of breaking glass rang through the stairwell. Michael pulled the old pistol from his coat. "We're out of time." Daniel grabbed Lila's hand, pulling her behind the altar as dust began to fall from the ceiling. Through the smoke of the collapsing stairs, dark figures descended one by one, masks gleaming in the candlelight. Lila's brother turned toward her. "If anything happens, use the key." "The key?" she cried. "It already opened the door." He shook his head. "Not that key. The one hidden inside your locket." He pressed something small and cold into her hand, a second key, this one golden, etched with the cross crest. "Find the vault," he whispered. "It's the only way to end this." A flash exploded across the chamber, then darkness. Smoke curled through the chapel as shouts echoed from the stairwell. Lila clutched the golden key in her palm, its surface still warm from her brother's hand. Daniel guided her toward a narrow passage behind the altar. "There's a service tunnel here, it leads under the gardens." Michael fired once toward the entrance, the crack of the shot ricocheting off the stone walls. "Go. I'll hold them off." Edward coughed through the dust. "No one's dying here tonight." "Not again." They slipped through the hidden passage just as another blast shook the chapel. The tunnel beyond was low and damp, lined with old brick and rusted pipes. The air smelled of iron and earth. Daniel's phone light flickered across ancient carvings along the walls, the Cross family crest, the dove, and strange symbols Lila didn't recognize. "What do they mean?" she asked. Edward ran his hand across one of the carvings. My father said these tunnels were built long before the manor, by the monks who founded the land. Some say there's a vault at the heart of it. Lila looked down at the golden key, its edges glowing faintly in the dark. Then that's where this belongs. After what felt like hours, they reached a stone door carved with an inscription half buried in moss. The truth sets free only those who dare to see. Lila took a deep breath and pressed the key into a small circular slot. A quiet click echoed through the corridor, followed by the slow grinding of gears. The door slid open to reveal a vast underground chamber. Lanterns flickered to life one by one, as if recognizing her presence. At the center stood a pedestal made of glass and gold. Upon it lay a thick leather book bound in crimson ribbon. Daniel whispered, "What is this place?" Edward's voice shook. "The original cross ledger, our family's record. It shouldn't exist anymore." Lila stepped closer. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from sand. When she touched the book, the shimmer grew brighter. Her vision blurred, flashes of faces, voices, memories that weren't hers. She saw her mother, Margaret, smiling as she wrote by candlelight. Her voice whispered through Lila's mind. The cross name was built on charity, or so they told the world. But beneath it lies the debt of every soul our fortune ruined. Lila gasped and stepped back. The ledger, it shows everything. The truth about how our family made its money. Edward bowed his head. The Cross Empire, it was never clean. We paid others to hide what we did. Daniel clenched his fists. And the people upstairs, the ones chasing us, they're protecting that secret. Lila's brother's faint voice came through the echoing tunnel behind them. Lila. Don't let them take it. A beam of light slashed through the darkness, flashlights. The masked men had found them. Run! Daniel shouted. Lila grabbed the ledger and turned toward a narrow archway, but as she passed under it, a hidden sensor sparked. Metal gates slammed down, cutting her off from the others. Lila! Daniel shouted, pounding on the gate. The leader of the masked men stepped from the shadows, removing his mask. His voice was calm, chillingly familiar. Edward froze. No, it can't be. The man smiled faintly. You should have left it buried, Father. Lila's heart stopped. Father, she whispered, turning to Edward. Edward's face went pale. My son. The man's eyes glinted in the dim light. And her brother's not the only one who came back from the fire. He raised a small remote, its red light blinking. You have something that belongs to me, Lila. The ground beneath her began to tremble. The vault shook as dust rained from the ceiling. Lila stumbled back, clutching the crimson-bound ledger to her chest. The masked man, Edward's lost son, stood before her, remote blinking red in his hand. Edward gripped the bars of the metal gate. Jacob, what have you done? Jacob's eyes were hard as steel. I did what you never could, protect the family name. You and Margaret were ready to destroy everything our ancestors built. Daniel slammed his shoulder against the gate. You burned an orphanage. You tried to bury children to hide your lies. Jacob's jaw tightened. Collateral damage. We all live off the sins of someone else, don't we? Lila took a shaky breath. Then why chase me? Why not just let the past die? He turned to her, voice low. Because you're the only one left who can prove what we did. That ledger in your hands, it's the key to the cross fortune. It records every false deal, every ruined life, and the code to the offshore account that funds it all. Edward's voice cracked. Jacob, please. Let her end this. We can still make it right. Jacob raised the remote. Right or wrong doesn't matter. Power does. He pressed the button. The floor beneath Lila split open, revealing a deep shaft of gears and light. The pedestal began to sink, pulling the ledger with it. Without thinking, Lila dove forward. No! She caught the ribbon just before the book slid away, her fingers burning against the edge. Daniel forced the gate open, sprinting toward her. Lila, let it go, he shouted. You'll fall. Tears streaked her cheeks. If I let it go, all those people stay buried. Edward staggered forward. Lila, trust your heart. She looked at him, then back at Jacob, his face twisted with fury, but behind it, something broke. Lila whispered, I forgive you. Jacob froze. Not for what you did, she said softly, but because hate can't be what ends our family. He hesitated just long enough for Daniel to reach her. Together, they hauled the ledger free and leapt back as the pedestal sank completely into the darkness below. The lights flickered, the ground rumbled, and then silence. Jacob stared at the empty shaft, his face pale. It's over, he whispered. Edward nodded, tears in his eyes. Yes, my son. It's finally over. Hours later, the morning sun broke over the ruins of the Cross estate. Fire crews and police surrounded the grounds, their radios crackling. Lila sat on the old stone steps, the ledger wrapped in her coat. Daniel stood beside her, arm around her shoulders. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked gently. She nodded. The truth has to come out. Not for revenge, for peace. Edward stepped forward, leaning on his cane. Your mother would be proud. She always believed love was stronger than legacy. Lila smiled faintly. Then maybe now, her story can rest. She handed the ledger to the arriving investigators. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but for the first time, Lila didn't feel small. She felt free. As they turned to leave, Daniel slipped his hand into hers. So, what happens now? Lila looked toward the sunrise. We start over. No secrets, no debts, just life. He grinned. Coffee first? She laughed softly. Only if you let me pay this time. But as they walked down the hill, a gust of wind blew open one of the ledger's loose pages, and hidden beneath the crimson ribbon, in faded ink, were 6 new words that no one had seen before. The second vault lies beneath New York. The page fluttered shut.